Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Luli. I'm a PhD student from Shanghai Astronomical Observatory, and now visiting Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Israel. So today I would like to introduce our recent work when using using a mixture model to modeling the open clusters in the calorimetric diagram to study the unresolved binaries, mass function, and the dynamical evolution of the clusters. My story will start from this background picture. This is a picture I took in Southern Hemisphere in New Zealand, and we can clearly see the Milky Way, the Magellanic Cloud, and the stars. And the stars are in, and the star clusters like this. This is open clusters. And all of you may very familiar with the beginning of the story. Stars are formed in the molecular cloud. They are not likely to form isolated, but formed in the clusters or associations. Then after the cloud dispersal, some of the cluster remains, as we can see the cluster here and here in the Milky Way. And then through the stellar dynamics like segregation and evaporation and the tidal disruption, most of the stars disperse to the field and becoming the disk population. And they have gone through the internal dynamic processes and the external dynamic processes. Like internal dynamic process, like dynamical relaxation lead to the mass segregation or the tidal disruption and evaporation. So they can serve as laboratories of the stellar dynamics and also can trace the potential of the host galaxies. So here is the comparisons of open clusters and globular clusters. Open clusters are relatively young, less massive, and fewer stars, and located in the disk. And the globular clusters are relatively old and more number of stars, and mostly located in the halo. So as cradles of stars and building blocks of the galaxies, open clusters have encoded valuable information of the star formation and the galaxy evolution. As the starting point of any further application, it is essential to measure the fundamental properties of the open clusters. And calorimetric diagram is a powerful tool. We can know that we can do isochron fitting in the CMD. But the field stock contamination is a long-existing problem. Instead of the historically people usually pick up the clean members and in the CMD and then do the isochron fitting by eye or by some. This is by eye method, and this is an automatic method. They are always using a more clean sample of the cluster. But instead of the membership determination first, isochron fitting next, and we have a better solution. I propose a mixture model of open clusters in the calorimetric diagram to fit the isochron, stellar mass function, and the binary parameters in the same time. The model treats an open cluster as a mixture of single stars and binary members, binary star members, and the few stars. The cluster members are modeled based on the stellar model isochron, mass function, and the binary properties. And the field component is modeled non-parametrically using nearby field. And in detail, for single stars, the age and the methodicity determine the shape of the isochron, right? The distance and the extinction determine the location of the isochron. The lumbar density along the isochron is determined by the stellar mass function. So we have to consider not only the single stars, but also the binaries. The majority of the stars sought to form in binary or multiple systems. The initial binary properties of the star place important constraints on star formation theory. So far, for an observed open cluster in CMD, we can see that there not only has the single star sequence, but also has the binary sequence. We also should incorporate the unresolved binaries in our model. Otherwise, it will bring bias when fit the isochron. In the CMD, the unresolved binary broaden the main sequence to the brighter and the redder direction. So we define the binary fraction and the mass ratio here. And we use a single power law to describe the mass ratio distribution. The index of the power law is gamma Q. The large gamma or the positive gamma, it means the cluster has more high Q binaries. In our model, we don't determine a star is a single star or the binary. We consider them as a mixture distribution. This is an illustration of the mixture distribution in column-vector diagram. This is the number density of the single star. And as I said before, the mass function can determine the number density along the isochron. And the mass ratio distribution determine the number density in the perpendicular direction for binary model. And here is the mixture distribution. The ratio of these two number density is determined by the binary fraction. And so far, if we have the numbers thus, we can fit the isochron, the mass function, and the binary properties simultaneously. Yes, and for field stars, we also don't distinguish whether a star is a field star or a member star, but use a mixture model to treat an open cluster as a mixture of these two components. We construct a non-parametric field model to describe the field stars. And so now we can construct a parametric model contain the isochron's properties, mass function, and the binary properties, and fit all these parameters along with the field star fraction simultaneously. This method has three advantages. First, we can incorporate the field component as a model component. And it can avoid the membership determination. And then this is the probability density distribution in the CMD. So we can fit the, we can measure the mass function and the binary properties. And the third one is, this is a Bayesian inference. So we can, it allows us to use more reliable measurement as prior. For example, I can use the modelicity from Apogee, Lamoste, or Galat. So the fitting result of the open cluster is here. The fitting sample, like the orange dot in this figure, we can see that there are so many field contamination. But in using our mixture model method, we can find the isochron very well, and then we can also determine the mass function, the slope of the mass function, and the binary fraction simultaneously. So we construct an open cluster parameter catalog about 1,000 open clusters that it contains isochron fitting result, and about 100 of them have the mass function and the binary fraction. The paper is in preparation, and the second result is the binaries of the binary stars. So the binary properties, when we use our method to the binary parameters, the binary parameter is particularly sensitive to the precise location of the main sequence. We can find that theoretical model doesn't match the main sequence perfectly, which may lead to an overestimation of the binary fraction, like in this region, right? We can consider these stars are the binary stars because the main sequence, the location of the main sequence doesn't match the isochron very well. So we propose a new algorithm based on the Gaussian process to measure the main sequence from the data itself. Unlike the people draw by hand, like free whiskey here. Oh, sorry. Our method is automatic, objective, and fast, and fits the data very well. The red one is the main sequence, region we found. And this work is in an algorithm paper published in Astronomy and Computing. And here we show the fitting result of NGC 3532. I would like to highlight this discovery. I find the lower binary fraction and a higher slope of the mass ratio distribution for stars with smaller mass or in the inner region. And this is because the smaller binding energy for smaller major mass or for the lower mass ratio, and more encounters happen in the inner region of the cluster. So the binary fraction of higher mass ratio binaries is nearly constant for each subsamples. This is because the high mass ratio binaries is less affected by the dynamical interaction. So the lack of low Q binaries is the evidence of dynamical interactions in the clusters. And such a discovery is impossible without a precise determining of the main sequence region line. Another very important result is the age dependence of the stellar mass function. We found that the older cluster have flatter slope of the mass function. This is the we use the single power law to describe the mass function, and this is a submitter mass function for the few stars. It's about minus 2.35, and this turn point. And this is a trend of the mass function evolution with age. This turn point is very interesting. We found this in the first time. And this background histogram is the distribution of the cluster's age. We can say that a typical age of an open cluster is several hundred million years, right? Interestingly, the typical age is consistent with the turn point of the mass function evolution. This shows that the young cluster can retain the initial mass function for the several hundred million years. They are about minus 2.27. It's close to the submitter mass function. And then after the several hundred million years, the dynamical evolution becomes important. This is maybe also a reason or the evidence that why we cannot find too many old open clusters, because they get disrupted to the field and becomes the field stars. And yes, this is our the result of the mixture model method. I would like to use a more interesting way to conclude our recent research with this sociology in the city of stars. I always use this slide to explain my discoveries to the public. And here, we may say that the massive stars tend to live in the city center. That if we compare the stellar mass to the wealth of a star, we may say the rich people live in the city center and the poor people have to go out of the city, move out of the city. And many stars, about 30% of the stars in open clusters are in marriage. They are in the binary systems. The most stable style of the marriage of the stars is the monogamy. Open relations, we say the higher order systems will be destroyed by the dynamics efficiently. The marriage of the stars is fragile when they're both poor. That means they're both less massive. And if one star is much poorer than its partner, that means that their mass ratio is very low and their marriage is fragile. And if they live in the downtown or live in the inner region of the cluster, well, there are too many temptations, dynamical encounters happen more frequently, they must be destroyed efficiently. So, but don't be so upset. There is an exception. The Hazy Hill law told us the hard binary may tend to get hardened. So the very loved ones tend to, yes, don't worry about the marriage. Okay, and so far is our result. Here I introduce two further extension of our MIMO mixture model method of open clusters. First, measuring the extension of the main sequence node is a byproduct of our method. When we have high spectroscopy data like VSI measurement, we can connect the distribution of stellar rotation to the main sequence turnoff extension. Also, finding blue straggler stars candidates can be another byproduct because these stars have low photometric membership but higher astrometric membership. And another extension is the multi-stellar population. The key point of our framework is that mixture model can combine multiple components into a single probability density distribution. For open clusters, it is the combination of SSP and the field. For multiple stellar populations, it can be the combination of multiple SSPs. So using our method to analyze the multiple stellar population is the natural extension. For globular clusters, we can study the star formation history of the globular clusters or the dwarf galaxies. For the few stars in the solar neighborhood, if we assume star formation history or the age metallicity relation, we can measure the IMF of the few stars. In conclusion, I established a comprehensive framework for open clusters in CMD. The mixture model can contain multiple components together, like single stars, binaries, and a few stars. And we can not only fit in the isochrone, but also measure the mass function and the binary properties. All these measurements can be done under the field contamination without membership determination. We also improve a Gaussian regression method to help us find the main sequence ridgeline, which is crucial to measure the low mass ratio binaries. Based on this strict statistical analysis and machine learning algorithm, I found this significant evidence of cluster dynamical evolution. Okay, that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Liu, for the very interesting talk.